He doesn't remember what freedom feels like. Only the tightness of a rope around his wrists and the sound of boots on wooden floors. The boy is inside a house, but it is not a home. It was never built to comfort him. It was built to contain him. He's surrounded by walls that don't protect. They watch. The floors creak in ways that feel like warnings. The ceilings hang heavy with silence, and every window that lets in the sun is also a reminder of the world he's not allowed to step into. He can see the fields, the trees, the horizon, but never feel them. The other slaves in the house move like shadows, like background furniture trained not to exist unless summoned. Their eyes stay low, their hands stay busy, their pain stays quiet. The master's children run and laugh. They're given books, toys, affection. The boy is given commands, threats, and chores. He's younger than them, but older where it counts. He knows things no child should have to learn. He knows how to walk without sound. He knows what it means when the master drinks too much. He knows that the wrong word, the wrong glance, the wrong breath could make him bleed. He's learned to read the temperature of the room faster than he's learned numbers. The master's smile is never good. The master's silence is never peace. He's taught to say yes, sir, and no, ma'am, even when the orders hurt him, especially then. He's punished for spilling, punished for speaking, punished for being seen when not needed. His bed is a pile of rags in the corner of the kitchen. His meals are cold leftovers scraped from pans. He eats fast, quietly, and never first. Never enough. The older ones tell him to keep his head down, that surviving is more important than fighting, that tears are dangerous, that dreaming is worse. And when the master calls, everything freezes. His spine stiffens, his breathing shallows, and his heartbeat becomes a drum of fear. Sometimes the master just walks past. Sometimes he gives him a task. Sometimes he tells him he's special. That's when it's worst. Because when cruelty wears a smile, you don't know where it begins or ends. The house pretends to be civilized, elegant, proper. But for him, it's a cage with polished wood floors. It smells like smoke, blood, perfume, and lies. Every door that opens is a threat. Every locked room holds a secret. He is not a son. He is not a guest. He is not even considered human. And this house, this so-called place of culture and order, it is the first lie they teach him, the first mask, the first wound, the first reminder that what looks gentle can still destroy you. This house was never a home. It was the start of something worse. If you're enjoying this video, like and subscribe to the Grimveil channel for more dark dives you won't forget. Before they arrived in America, they were already broken. Not because they were weak, but because someone made sure they would be. It started long before the cotton fields, long before the whips and the chains. It started in the dark belly of a ship, where light never reached, and screams were muffled by wood and water. They were dragged from their homes, from their villages, from their families, tied neck to neck, hands bound, dignity stripped, forced onto ships like animals. But even animals aren't stacked like this. Row upon row of human beings, shoulder to shoulder, chained to the floor, with barely enough space to breathe. Some didn't make it through the first night. Some tried to hold on to songs, to names, to memories. Others closed their eyes and never opened them again. The stench of blood, vomit, sweat, and seawater mixed with the stink of despair. Rats crawled over limbs. Disease ran faster than hope. Women were not safe. Children were not safe. No one was. And still, the ship moved forward like a floating graveyard, crossing the ocean with its cargo of pain. By the time they arrived, many were dead. The ones who weren't, they weren't truly alive either. They had been broken in silence, in darkness, in chains. And when the port came into view, there was no relief, only more fear. Because now came the part where they would be sold. The part where whatever was left of their past would be erased with a number, a new name, a new price tag. They were washed, oiled, paraded onto wooden platforms like livestock. Buyers poked their arms, checked their teeth, stared at their bodies like merchandise. Children were pulled from their mothers' arms. Wives were sold away from husbands. Brothers ripped from sisters. Some screamed, some begged. Others didn't make a sound, because they'd already learned that sound meant punishment. The auction block wasn't just a sale. It was a ritual of erasure, a public stripping of identity, a declaration that these were not people. These were tools, property, machines to be used until broken and then replaced. A young boy might be sold for strength, a girl for how easily she could be trained, a man for his endurance, a woman for her ability to bear children. They called it commerce, but what it really was terror in daylight. And when the chains changed hands and the bills were paid, what followed wasn't life. It was survival under a new master, a new name, a new place to suffer. And the worst part? This was just the beginning. The first step in a lifetime of being owned. Because once they left the auction, they entered the next chapter of control. And whatever fire still burned inside them, it had to stay hidden, buried, silent, until it found a way out. They woke before the sun and worked until the stars came out. Every day was the same, except the pain. That changed. Some days it was in their hands. Some days it was in their back. Some days it was in their spirit. The fields were not places of growth. They were arenas of survival. Cotton tore their skin. Sun boiled their flesh. Insects gnawed at their ankles. There were no shoes, no rest, no water unless permitted. The overseer's voice echoed like thunder across the rows. Hurry, work, move, now. Faster. And behind the voice, always the whip. A promise more than a tool. It cracked not just to wound, but to remind them that their bodies were not their own, that every inch of flesh, every drop of sweat, every movement, every heartbeat was rented out to cruelty. There was no privacy, no ownership, no sanctuary. Even their most vulnerable moments, sleep, hunger, sickness, were policed. And the suffering didn't end when the sun went down. The houses were cold and small, barely holding back the wind. Crude wooden shacks stuffed with too many bodies. Rats skittered beneath the floorboards. Disease festered in the corners. And yet, in those broken spaces, they still tried to build something human. They whispered lullabies. They braided each other's hair. They held hands under the stars, just to remember what tenderness felt like. But even that was risky, because even love could be taken. A husband might be sold away at any time. A mother might watch her child disappear down a dirt road with no goodbye. And worst of all, their bodies were used in ways far beyond labor. The master's eye didn't just look at their work, it looked at their shape, their youth, their silence. Black women were used, violated, claimed as if pleasure were part of their duty. No consent, no dignity, no escape. Many bore children they didn't ask for, and when those children came, they were born into chains, into servitude, forced to serve their own blood, their own fathers. as if family was just another cruel trick. For black men, the pain took another form. They were forced to watch, to endure, to accept. Their masculinity was weaponized against them, stripped away, crushed beneath humiliation. Strength became submission. Fatherhood became silence. And if any man dared to resist, he was made into a lesson. Publicly, brutally. There were no courts, no mercy, no explanation. Just pain and the silence that followed it. The system didn't just want workers. It wanted obedience. It wanted empty vessels. It wanted tools that moved and breathed but did not dream. And every time they tried to remember who they were before, someone reminded them that they no longer had a name, no longer had a choice. The body was never theirs, not to love, not to protect, not to rest, not even to grieve. They were told they were stupid. They were told they were property. And then they were punished when they tried to prove otherwise. The masters feared rebellion, but they feared reading more. A slave with thoughts was dangerous. A slave with words was a weapon. So they banned books, banned letters, banned the very act of looking at a page. In some states, it was illegal to teach a slave to read. In others, it was punishable by whipping, mutilation, even death. Not because reading caused violence, but because reading exposed truth. A single word could ignite a fire. A sentence could undo a system. So they hunted those words like they hunted bodies, violently. And yet, in the dark, in the cracks of the system, they learned anyway. They taught each other by whisper. They used sticks and dirt, ashes on walls, charcoal on scraps of cloth. They passed messages and hymns. They memorized the shape of letters by feeling them carved into wood. They listened when no one thought they were listening. And they remembered. Because even when you steal a person's body, you cannot easily erase the soul. The mind is a battlefield the master could never fully conquer, and they knew it. That's why the punishments were so cruel. That's why the fear was so constant. Because deep down the system knew that knowledge couldn't be enslaved. A literate slave became someone who could imagine, who could calculate escape, who could teach others, who could write their name, who could speak their story. And a story is a kind of freedom. A name is a kind of rebellion. A dream is a kind of fire. When one slave escaped and wrote his autobiography, the world changed. When another stole a moment to learn scripture, she found a voice the master couldn't silence. Education became resistance. Literacy became survival. And so the system pushed back harder. They spread lies, that black minds were inferior, that slavery was mercy, that without the master's control they would collapse. But history proves otherwise. Those who were denied knowledge became scholars. Those banned from books wrote libraries. Those silenced by law became voices for generations. But in that time, in those days of chains and fear, the message was clear. If you think, you suffer. If you question, you bleed. If you understand too much, you vanish. Even prayers had to be whispered. Even songs had to hide their meanings. They lived in a world where even thoughts were crimes. And still they thought. Still they dreamed. Still they hoped. Because hope, like knowledge, spreads. Quietly, slowly, but it spreads. And once it's in you, it's hard to kill. That's why they feared it. That's why they tried so hard to bury it. But truth, like a seed, finds a way through even the hardest ground. They said it was over. The war had been won. The chains had been broken. The papers had been signed. But freedom, real freedom, never came. Not truly, not fully. They were told they were no longer property, but they were still treated like they didn't belong. They were free, but they had nothing. No land, no shelter, no food, no compensation for stolen years. Just the same broken tools, the same crumbling shacks, and the same masters, now called employers. The plantations didn't close. They just changed the rules. Wages were promised, but barely paid. Contracts were signed, but never honored. Debts were created that could never be escaped. Sharecropping, tenant farming, labor that felt exactly like slavery, only with a different name. The laws changed, but the hatred stayed. And when laws weren't enough to hold them down, violence filled the gap. Black codes, vagrancy laws, curfews, laws designed to catch them in failure, designed to trap them in place. They were arrested for walking too far, talking too loud, for not having work, for trying to vote. And when the law couldn't reach them, mobs did. White robes, burning crosses, nooses thrown over branches older than the country itself. They said justice was blind, but justice had a face, and it didn't look like theirs. They built towns, safe places, black wall streets, communities where they could breathe. But when they became too successful, too visible, too proud, those towns burned. Tulsa, Rosewood, and dozens of others that were never even recorded. Entire histories erased in fire. The system adapted. It always did. Schools were segregated, neighborhoods divided, banks refused loans, hospitals turned them away. Red lines were drawn across maps, and with a single stroke, families were locked out of opportunity. The plantation had become a nation. Overseers became police. Chains became courtrooms. Whips became policies. And still, they rose. They marched. They bled again. They sang songs that remembered pain, but pointed toward light. They raised children who were taught never to forget, but also to dream. They wrote books, ran businesses, held office, led movements. They pushed forward against a tide that never stopped pushing back. And every time they were told to forget, they remembered. Every time they were told to be quiet, they spoke louder. Every time they were told they didn't belong, they planted roots anyway. But the truth is, freedom isn't just about the law. It's about dignity, safety, equality, and those things are still unevenly given. The lie they were sold was that the past was past, that what was done is buried, but the soil still holds the blood. The trees still carry the scars. The systems, built on slavery's foundation, still stand, just repainted, just renamed. And the silence around it is not peace. It's neglect. This isn't history. It's legacy. It lives in the cracks of cities, in the weight of names, in the shape of opportunity. And if we call it freedom, we must also call it unfinished, because freedom without truth is just another kind of lie.